Okay, so this is part two of the podcast to the question explain the political conflicts in Germany between 1914 and 1919. We'll just jump straight to where we finished off. Okay, so we've reached a point where to absolve themselves of responsibility, the elites, the military high command, the OHL, have passed power over to Prince Max of Baden, who attempted to resolve the situation by announcing a reform of the constitution, but that was too little, too late. And of course, any attempts um, to to resolve that situation were really scuppered by one, the fact that he didn't follow through and introduce immediate economic or social reforms, which may possibly have taken the pressure, eased the pressure from the lower levels of society who were clamouring for immediate change. But they were also clamouring for an immediate end to the war, and that didn't, of course, happen because the Allies dragged out the negotiations. So the revolutionary pressures continued to build up, and that's the situation we reached. So we're on heading F. Mutinies, Soviets, and handover of power to SPD. Now, this is an area which it's really important that you make sure you understand. To be honest, if you're talking about the end of World War One, the impact on Germany, and if you're talking about the German Revolution, you need to be talking about the Soviets. That is really, really important. So let's just go through this and be very clear about it. So basically, what happened the war's still going on, the Kaiser's still there. Early November, that simmering discontent, impatience from the lower levels of society began to make itself evident, and it first became clear within the Navy, but also in the Army. Okay, and what started to happen basically were mutinies. Okay, now obviously the most famous example was the Kiel mutiny, where sailors refused to obey their officers. But the same happened out in France and Belgium at the fighting front. Ordinary soldiers now started to put down their guns, refused to obey their officers. So you're starting to see mutinies. Remember that the Navy and the Army were like a microcosm of what society looked at. You've got the same social pyramid within those organisations. So what's now happening is the lower levels are refusing to cooperate with the upper levels. And when that happened, the lower levels spontaneously formed what we call councils. Now, the Russian word for council is Soviet, okay? But they were formed wherever there were these rebellions. So in the army, there were soldiers' councils. In the navy, there were sailors' councils. In the cities, there were workers' councils that were formed in the factories. And what these councils were almost like self-help organisations. They simply said, we're not going to be told what to do anymore by the people upstairs. We're going to start making our own decisions. Now the big question is how politicised were these councils? On one level, they were not. They were just primarily about sorting out our problems so we can feed ourselves and feed our families. Okay, that is not politicised, but some councils became politicised. Now, politicised basically means that they wanted to change the regime. They wanted to march on the capital and get rid of the Kaiser. Okay, so their intentions crossed that line from being loyal to the Kaiser to actually wanting to get rid of the Kaiser. Now, it was not a given that just because there were councils being organised that they were going to be disobedient to the Kaiser. Okay, that situation changed over time, and it also varied from region to region. But these councils were all over Germany. Okay, they started off in the ports in Kiel, but they quickly spread, and they were all over Germany. Okay, and the Kaiser, of course, was highly conscious of this, of these councils forming, and that effectively law and order was breaking down. And so the formation of these councils was the final trigger that caused Kaiser Wilhelm II to abdicate. He stepped down. Now, another thing which is really important to remember, it wasn't just the Kaiser who abdicated. He abdicated as Emperor of Germany, but also as King of Prussia. But all of those separate rulers of all the individual states, who were all monarchs, all privileged rulers, kings, princes, grand dukes, all likewise abdicated. Okay? Now, once that started to happen, Prince Max effectively realised that there was no future for him as Chancellor, so he stepped down as Chancellor on the 9th of November. And he handed power over to the leader of the SPD, Friedrich Ebert. Now, why did he do that? Because the SPD were the largest political party in the Reichstag. Okay? But we have a complication. Okay? The SPD was, of course, split into three rival groups. So when Hebert met with his party, you can imagine the sort of several hundred men, and they're all in disagreement about what now to do. Okay, on one level, you've got the supporters of Hebert, the majority socialists. Okay, they were instinctively loyal to the existing system. They wanted to make the most of the October reforms and the power that they had been given by Prince Max. So that in other words, they wanted to carry on running Germany using the Reichstag. That they said, look, the Reichstag is properly elected, it represents all Germans. There may be people within it who we don't like, the middle classes, there are right-wing parties, there are middle-class parties, but nevertheless it is representative. That's what they wanted. So they didn't want to go for an extreme solution. Okay, but there were extremists. Now, on the other extreme were the Spartacist League. Now, they'd been formed in 1916. They were a fringe group of the SPD, and they completely opposed Germany's involvement in the war. And what they wanted to do was to bring about revolutionary communism. Okay, so in other words, they basically said we do not want to rule using the Reichstag, because the Reichstag includes middle classes. It includes political parties that represent the rich. We do not recognise them. So they wanted to basically move to Russian-style communism, where government would not be through the elected parliament, but government would be through the councils that have been forming. And effectively the Soviets, these councils, would elect a national Soviet. Okay. And then you've got a group in the middle, the independent socialists, who also opposed Germany's involvement in the war, but they were not as revolutionary as the Spartacists. Okay, so they were kind of like a bridge between the majority SPD and the Spartacist League. Moving on. Now, what then happened is we enter this period of what we call power sharing, okay, from November to December. So on the 9th of November, the day that power was given over, there was a great deal of confusion. And effectively, the Republic was declared twice by different people. First of all, it was declared by Liebknecht and the Spartacists. Okay, so in the excitement of the fact that the Kaiser has abdicated, Liebknecht and the Spartacists suddenly announced the Reich is dead, the Kaiser is gone, Germany is now a republic. Well, fair enough, that's what they believed. But secondly, Philipp Scheidemann, the deputy leader of the SPD, also declared that the Reich was at an end and that Germany was now a republic. In other words, it's not just the fact that Kaiser has abdicated, the whole system of privilege, the whole system of a head of state who is an elected monarch is now permanently gone. And Hebert disagreed with that. Hebert said just because the Kaiser has abdicated does not mean that it is an end to the Reich. Okay, it is for the National Assembly to decide whether the Reich comes to an end. The National Assembly has to decide whether they may decide that we want to have a different Kaiser. Okay, and that the Reich continues. Now, what was the National Assembly? Well, the National Assembly, as far as Hebert was concerned, didn't exist yet. It had to be elected. It had to be a new constituent body that represented all Germans, including the middle classes. They had to have their say as well. Now, it would take time to elect in the National Assembly. The first thing to do is to end the war and get everybody back, get the soldiers back from the front so they can vote as well. So in the meantime, whilst that before that can happen, from November to December, we have to basically govern Germany through what we have. Now, what we have at the moment is we have the existing Reichstag, and we have the councils that have been spontaneously forming. So what then happened was a strange phase where there was power sharing. Okay, it was an attempt to share power, partly through the Reichstag that continued to meet, but also through a Council of People's Representatives. Okay, so now the Council of People's Representatives was a Soviet. It was effectively like all the different Soviets sent representatives to a central council that met in Berlin. That existed alongside the Reichstag, and ABER and the MSPD were represented in both these organisations. Okay, the USPD was represented by these people there. Okay, the names. Now, as you can see from the next heading, that power sharing, in which the Council of People's Representatives and a kind of like a parliament representing the working classes, okay, that was genuinely sharing power with the old Reichstag, didn't last very long. It began to break up. Now, why was that? The council fell apart because of differences over longer-term strategies and policies. Okay, the majority socialists, led by ABER, believed the council should only be a caretaker government until that National Assembly was elected by all Germans, including the middle classes, whose job would then be to draw up a new constitution. The independent socialists and the Spartacists believed that the Council of People's Representatives should rule permanently, in line with revolutionary Russia. In other words, Germany should be based on workers' councils, workers, soldiers and peasants' councils, and that the middle classes would be excluded. Now, those specific differences began to emerge in December 1918, and they emerged specifically over disagreements about who should control the police. Should it be the Reichstag or should it be the Soviets? Over industrial production, the Spartacists and the USPD were arguing that property and businesses should be nationalised to be brought under workers' control, but ABER was reluctant to do anything until the National Assembly had met, and he said that was the decision of the National Assembly. And then, crucially, over the future of the German army. Should the German army become a people's army, which is what the Spartacists and the USPD wanted, whereas, of course, ABER said, well, we can't make that such a radical decision. That should be for the National Assembly to decide once the National Assembly meets in January. So in December 1918, that split became irreparable. It became permanent. The USPD fully ended their cooperation with the majority socialists. They effectively walked out of the meetings and they threw in their lot with the Spartacists. And the Spartacists changed their name to the Communist Party. Nice quote there from Lee. Thus, the original SPD splintered along the fault lines it had shown during the First World War into three distinct parties. Now, what then happened, of course, is effectively ABER survived, okay, because you've got two groups. You've got the Spartacists and the USPD, and then you've got ABER and the moderate left wing. So the new republic was divided, quickly just to go through these points. Central government was now divided between, you've got the radicals, who envisage a permanent system of rule by Soviets. You've got the moderates, who preferred the restoration of a constitutional structure based on the Reichstag, led by ABER and the majority socialists. And the same is also happening on a different level in the states. The 25 different states, the Länder, e.g. in Bavaria, you can see exactly the same happen. It briefly came under the rule of the USPD, under a man called Kurt Eisner, in November 1918. That in return was replaced by a short-lived communist regime under a man called Leviné in April 1918. Then, of course, in January 1919, you got the Spartacist uprising, where the communists made an ill-judged bid to grab power in Berlin by overthrowing the government of Hebert. So Liebknecht and Luxembourg attempted to overthrow the majority socialist government, um, which forced Hebert to basically flee the capital for a few weeks. And of course, that we then know what happened, because that effectively opened the way. Now already Hebert had contacted Groener, the commander-in-chief of the tattered German army. Groener offered Hebert military support to sort out the country, to put down these uprisings to maintain law and order. Hebert benefited in three ways. That pact with Groener gave Hebert the self-assurance and the confidence to resist the pressure from the USPD and the Spartacists, who were pushing for immediate radical changes. And so Hebert was able to put down the Spartacists by calling upon the support of the Freikorps, ex-soldiers returning from the front, which crushed the attempted rebellion and shot Liebknecht and Luxembourg in cold blood. Hebert then did the same with the attempts by the far left to seize power elsewhere in Germany. So the Freikorps, for example, was sent to Bavaria, where they crushed the communist uprising by Levenay, and also similar uprisings in Saxony in 1919. Long-term significance, just to quickly finish off, by 1920 the USPD had completely disintegrated. And what that did is it left a great big gap between the majority socialists and the KPD, and that gap was never healed, with huge significance for the future. The communists never forgave Hebert for that. They never forgot the actions taken against them by the majority SPD, and as a result the communists remained permanently opposed to cooperating with the Weimar Republic. The SPD always remained suspicious of the intentions of the communists. If they had been prepared to find common ground and work with them, it's likely the political left could have united to prevent Hitler taking power in 1933. In other words, the polarisation of the left wing between revolutionaries and evolutionary democrats gave an opportunity to the political right wing, whether that be nationalist, e.g. Hugenberg, or Nazi, e.g. Hitler, later on to attack the whole basis of Weimar democracy. Okay, that's the end of that excellent essay. I'll make sure all these Stephen Lee essays, the originals, are scanned and put into the articles folder in Frog for you. Okay, I've got to finish there. Thank you.